The spark of kindness. Emily Lawson had always known she was meant to be a teacher. It was something her heart gravitated toward from a young age. While others around her grew up and found various paths in life, Emily stayed true to her dream, motivated by the desire to nurture young minds. Her dedication led her to Meadowridge Elementary, a modest, underfunded school nestled in a small town where many families faced financial struggles. Despite the daily challenges, she found the job profoundly fulfilling. She believed that no matter their background, every child deserved the chance to learn, grow, and most importantly, feel seen and valued. The school itself bore signs of its limited resources, walls needing fresh paint, playground equipment that was slowly rusting, and textbooks that were held together by tape in some cases. Supplies were scarce, and teachers often had to purchase their own materials if they wanted to conduct any creative or interactive lessons. Emily frequently found herself dipping into her own pocket to buy supplies or little treats for the children, small gestures to help make her classroom a place where the students felt loved and cared for. But she never complained. In her eyes, her students were worth every penny and every effort. One crisp autumn morning, Emily was in the middle of preparing the classroom for the day. She loved arriving early to make sure everything was perfect, arranging the desks, and leaving little notes of encouragement on students' desks. She believed that these small touches could go a long way in making her students feel valued. As she finished her preparations, she noticed one of her students, Tommy, slipping quietly into the room, head bowed. Tommy was a bright 8-year-old with an infectious smile, but today he looked uncharacteristically withdrawn, sitting at his desk with his shoulders slumped and avoiding eye contact with anyone around him. Curious and concerned, Emily walked over to his desk and crouched down to his level, her voice soft with care. "Hey Tommy, is everything all right?" she asked, searching his face for a clue to his downcast mood. Tommy hesitated, biting his lip, and then, almost unconsciously, his eyes drifted down to his shoes. They were worn thin, patches of fabric frayed at the edges, and there was a small hole near the toe of his left shoe where his sock was peeking through. Emily's heart ached at the sight. Seeing the struggle he was going through, trying to hide the evidence of his family's financial strain, struck a deep chord within her. She didn't pry further, respecting his unspoken request to avoid attention on the matter. However, as she continued teaching that day, Tommy's worn-out shoes lingered at the back of her mind. She watched him avoid running with the other kids during recess and sensed his hesitation every time his feet shuffled under his desk. That evening, Emily couldn't shake the image of Tommy's shoes from her mind. She replayed his embarrassed expression over and over, and the weight of it settled heavily in her heart. She knew how hard life could be for some of her students, and had often thought about how she could do more to help them. Emily thought back to her own childhood. She hadn't come from a wealthy family, and there were times when even she felt the sting of being the kid with less among her peers. She understood the feeling of wanting to fit in, to avoid the judgmental eyes of others. It was a memory that still felt raw, even after all these years. That night, she made a decision. On her way home from work the next day, she stopped by a local shoe store. She spent a while browsing, making sure she found a pair that was sturdy, but also something a young boy would be proud to wear. She chose a pair of dark blue sneakers, imagining how Tommy's eyes might light up at seeing them. They were modest, but Emily hoped they'd be a source of confidence for him, even in small ways. She paid for the shoes with a quiet sense of purpose, convincing herself that the small expense was worth it. The following morning, she arrived at school a little earlier than usual, anxious to deliver the gift without making Tommy feel self-conscious. She knew her gesture could be sensitive for a young boy who was already dealing with the harsh reality of financial struggle. Just before the bell rang, she discreetly pulled him aside and handed him the box, her voice low and gentle. "Tommy, I got these for you," she said, her eyes meeting his with warmth. "I hope they fit. Just thought they might make you a bit more comfortable." Tommy's eyes widened as he took the box from her hands, his cheeks flushing with a mixture of surprise and happiness. He opened the lid, peering inside, And for the first time in days, Emily saw a wide smile break across his face. He stammered out a soft, "Thank you, Miss Lawson," his gratitude clear in his eyes. It was a simple moment, but for Emily, it felt like she had just moved mountains. She felt a deep warmth spreading through her chest, knowing she had made a difference for Tommy, no matter how small it might seem to others. Throughout that day, Emily's heart lifted every time she saw Tommy, now wearing his new shoes proudly. She noticed he was more cheerful, more engaged, and he even joined the other kids in running during recess, something he hadn't done in days. Seeing him regain his confidence and his joy reminded her why she had chosen to be a teacher. It was never about the paycheck or the career prestige. It was about moments like these, moments of connection, kindness, and understanding. But unbeknownst to Emily, someone had noticed her gesture. A parent who had been passing by the classroom that morning saw her handing Tommy the box. By the end of the day, the parent's curiosity led them to bring it up to the principal, Mr. Davidson, a rule-bound man who held school policies as sacrosanct. By evening, Emily's act of kindness had become the topic of whispered conversations among staff, and word had reached the administrative office. 2 days later, Emily was called into Mr. Davidson's office, and she entered with a mix of curiosity and mild apprehension. Mr. Davidson was seated behind his desk, his expression unreadable as he motioned for her to sit down. Emily took a seat, clasping her hands nervously in her lap. "Emily," Mr. Davidson began, his tone formal and measured. "I've been informed that you purchased a pair of shoes for a student. Is that correct?" Emily nodded, keeping her gaze steady, hoping he would see the genuine intent behind her action. "Yes, I bought them for Tommy. His shoes were very worn, and I just wanted him to feel comfortable." Mr. Davidson leaned back in his chair, sighing deeply. "I understand your intentions were good," he said slowly, "but we have a policy that strictly prohibits teachers from giving personal gifts to students. It can create feelings of favoritism or obligations, and the school board requires us to adhere to these rules." The principal's words hit her like a punch to the gut. Emily tried to explain her reasons, to convey that it was only meant to help Tommy feel at ease, but Mr. Davidson's gaze remained fixed, his expression steely and unwavering. "Emily, the school board has reviewed the matter," he continued. "It was decided that this is a serious violation, and unfortunately, we have to terminate your employment immediately." The weight of his words sank into her, numbing her with shock. Fired. The word reverberated in her mind, almost surreal. Fired, not for negligence or misconduct, but for an act of compassion. She had loved her job, cherished her students, and poured her heart into every lesson. Now, because of a small act of kindness, it was all slipping away. As she gathered her belongings that afternoon, a deep sense of injustice welled up within her. How could something so small, so well-intentioned, have cost her the career she'd worked so hard for? She fought back tears, reminding herself that she had done what she thought was right, even if the world didn't seem to agree. But as she walked out of the school building for what felt like the last time, her heart felt heavy, burdened with a sense of defeat and disillusionment. Little did she know, however, that her story was far from over. In just a few days, the repercussions of her kindness would ripple far beyond anything she could have imagined. And when her phone would ring with an unknown number, her life would take a turn she never saw coming. Consequences of kindness. Emily sat in her small, dimly lit apartment, replaying the events of the day over and over. The humiliation and disbelief of being fired weighed heavily on her, wrapping around her like a thick, suffocating fog. She'd always held Mr. Davidson in high regard as a principal who respected his staff and understood their challenges. But today, he'd seemed like a stranger, his tone detached, his words cutting and impersonal. She couldn't reconcile the man she'd once trusted with the cold voice that had delivered her termination. After hours of staring blankly at the walls, Emily finally mustered the energy to tell her family what had happened. She called her mother, whose voice went from curious to horrified in a matter of seconds. "They fired you for buying shoes." Her mother's voice rose in indignation, and Emily could almost see her mother's shocked expression through the phone. "How is that even possible? You did something kind, Emily. That's what you've always done." "Yes, I thought so too," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But they said I violated school policy. I don't know what to think anymore." After a few more words of encouragement, Emily's mother offered to come over, but Emily declined, saying she needed some time to herself. She hung up the phone and sat in silence, feeling the weight of her world shifting. Her job had been more than just a career to her. It was a calling, a purpose that guided her each day. Now she felt adrift, lost without the compass that had directed her life for so long. The following morning, Emily woke with a heavy heart. As she sipped her coffee, she stared out the window, watching the golden light of dawn spread across the rooftops. She thought about her students, about Tommy, and about the school where she poured so much of herself. For a moment, she felt a surge of anger at Mr. Davidson, at the school board, at the rules that had stripped her of her livelihood. But just as quickly, the anger faded, replaced by a hollow ache. Deciding she couldn't stay cooped up all day, she dressed and went for a walk. As she strolled through the park, she tried to distract herself, watching the joggers, the dog walkers, and the parents with their laughing children. But no matter where she looked, she couldn't escape the sense of loss that clung to her like a shadow. When she returned home, she found a small stack of mail waiting for her. One letter caught her attention immediately. It was from the school. With trembling hands, she opened it, expecting some sort of formal notice of her termination. Instead, she found a letter from Mr. Davidson, addressing her termination and reiterating the reasons the school board had given for their decision. He emphasized the school's commitment to fairness and equity among all students, saying that by giving a personal gift, she had breached a line that could undermine trust in their policies. As she read, a wave of frustration bubbled up within her. The letter felt like a slap in the face, a clinical explanation of why her compassion had no place in the structured world of the school. She thought of Tommy and how he must have felt when she handed him the shoes, the relief and happiness in his eyes. To think that her small act of kindness had been twisted into something negative was deeply painful. But beyond the frustration, Emily felt something else, a fierce sense of injustice. The letter reminded her that sometimes rules were just words on paper, and they didn't account for real life, for empathy, or for the needs of those struggling the most. She knew many of her students came from homes where they didn't have enough to go around. She'd spent years witnessing it firsthand, helping where she could, whether by lending them supplies, bringing extra snacks, or giving them a warm smile on a tough day. To her, teaching was as much about compassion as it was about education. Days passed, each one blending into the next, until one afternoon when she found herself at the local grocery store. As she browsed the aisles, she heard a familiar voice call her name. Turning around, she saw Mrs. Caldwell, a parent of one of her former students. Mrs. Caldwell approached her with a warm smile, but her eyes held a hint of worry. "Emily, I heard about what happened at school," she began, her tone soft with sympathy. "I just want you to know that there are many of us who support you. You did something kind, and kindness should never be punished." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. I just wanted to help Tommy. He was struggling, and I couldn't bear to see him in those old shoes." Mrs. Caldwell reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "I understand, dear. And we all see how much you care. Some of the other parents and I have been talking. We think what they did to you was wrong. We're planning to write a letter to the school board to let them know how we feel about it." Emily felt a glimmer of hope, a small spark in the midst of her despair. The thought that others believed in her actions, that they understood her intentions, was a balm to her wounded spirit. She thanked Mrs. Caldwell, feeling a bit lighter as she continued with her shopping. Later that evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, she reflected on Mrs. Caldwell's words. The support from the parents meant a great deal to her, but it couldn't change the fact that she was now unemployed, with no clear path forward. Her passion for teaching felt more like a distant dream than a reality, a part of her life that had been stolen away. Just as she was about to drift into another sleepless night, her phone rang. Startled, she glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. Confused, she hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," she said softly. "Hello, is this Emily Lawson?" A warm, calm voice on the other end asked. "Yes, this is she," Emily replied, curiosity piqued. "Ms. Lawson, my name is Jonathan Reeves. I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time. I recently heard about your situation at Meadowridge Elementary and wanted to reach out. I understand you went above and beyond for one of your students, and I'd like to talk with you about it." Emily's heart raced. She had no idea who this man was or how he knew about her, but there was something sincere in his tone that caught her attention. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," she replied, her voice cautious. "But I'm not sure what there is to talk about. I've already lost my job over it." "I understand, Ms. Lawson," he said, his voice kind and understanding. "But please, hear me out. I run a foundation focused on supporting underprivileged children and their educators. It's a cause I feel very passionate about. When I learned about your story, I felt compelled to reach out. I believe what you did was admirable, and it would be a shame for your compassion to go unappreciated." Emily was silent, stunned by his words. Here was a man she'd never met, offering her empathy and understanding that her own school had denied her. It was almost too good to be true. "I know this must be overwhelming," Jonathan continued, sensing her hesitation. "I won't keep you long. I just want to invite you to come and meet with me. Let's talk about a way for you to continue making the difference. My foundation could use someone like you." Emily's mind whirled with 1,000 questions, but above all, she felt a flicker of hope. It was the first time in days that she felt as though there might be a future beyond the narrow walls of Meadowridge Elementary. After a moment of silence, she found her voice again. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. I'd like to meet and hear more." "Wonderful," Jonathan replied, sounding genuinely pleased. "I'll have my assistant arrange a time that works for you. I look forward to meeting you, Ms. Lawson. I think this might be the beginning of something wonderful." As Emily ended the call, she felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. The weight of her recent loss hadn't disappeared, but now there was something new, a chance, a possibility. Perhaps the chapter she thought had closed was only the start of something far greater than she'd imagined. An unexpected call. The days following Emily's unexpected call with Jonathan Reeves were a whirlwind of emotions. At first, she could hardly believe the conversation had even happened. She'd spent the last few nights lying awake, wondering if her entire teaching career had been cut short over a single act of kindness. Now, here was this mysterious philanthropist, someone who seemed genuinely invested in her story, offering a glimmer of hope she hadn't anticipated. In the days leading up to their meeting, Emily pored over what little she could find about Jonathan Reeves online. As it turned out, he wasn't just any businessman. He was the founder of the Reeves Foundation, a massive organization dedicated to providing educational resources and support to underserved schools across the country. He was known for his generous donations to schools, libraries, and community centers, as well as his advocacy for educational reform. From what Emily read, he was a man driven by an intense passion for making a difference in the world, particularly in the lives of children and educators. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, Emily found herself standing outside a gleaming glass building, feeling both excited and nervous. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and stepped through the revolving doors. The lobby was sleek and modern, bustling with people who looked focused and purposeful. Emily couldn't help but feel slightly out of place, dressed in her simple blazer and skirt among the sea of polished suits. As she approached the reception desk, a young woman greeted her with a warm smile. "Ms. Lawson," she asked, her voice friendly. "Mr. Reeves is expecting you. Please, Follow me." Emily was led through a series of hallways until they reached an office at the end of the corridor. The assistant knocked gently, and moments later, the door opened to reveal a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a kind, approachable face. He extended his hand with a welcoming smile. "Emily, I'm so glad you could make it," he said, his voice as warm and sincere as it had been on the phone. She shook his hand, offering a shy smile in return. "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Reeves. Please call me Jonathan," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. The office was bright and airy, with large windows offering a view of the city skyline. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with titles on education, leadership, and philanthropy. Several framed photos dotted his desk, images of Jonathan shaking hands with community leaders, smiling with children at various charity events, and standing beside educators at award ceremonies. Emily felt immediately at ease, as if she were in the office of someone who genuinely cared about the work they did. "So, Emily," Jonathan began, sitting down across from her, "I want you to know that I don't make calls like this often. But when I heard about what happened to you, I felt compelled to reach out. Your story struck a chord with me." Emily nodded, her voice a bit shaky as she responded. I appreciate that. Honestly, I'm still trying to understand how something so small, something I thought was just a simple act of kindness, could have ended my career." Jonathan's expression softened. "Unfortunately, our world doesn't always value kindness the way it should, especially in institutions like schools where rules sometimes overshadow compassion. I've seen it happen time and again. Teachers trying to do what's right, only to face punishment instead of praise. It's an injustice, plain and simple." Emily felt a weight lift as he spoke, sensing his genuine empathy for her situation. "Thank you. It's been difficult to come to terms with," she admitted. "Teaching was more than a job to me. It was everything." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that. And that's why I believe you're exactly the kind of person we need here at the Reeves Foundation. We work to support educators and children in need, just like the ones you were serving at Meadowridge Elementary. I think someone with your passion and experience could make an enormous impact here." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She'd spent her entire career dedicated to her students, often feeling limited by the resources at her disposal. Now this man was offering her the chance to make a difference on a scale she'd never dreamed of. "But I don't know anything about working at a foundation," she admitted, her voice uncertain. "My experience is in the classroom, not in an office." Jonathan chuckled. "And that's exactly why you're perfect for this role. We have plenty of people who know how to manage a foundation, who understand budgets and policies. What we need are people who understand the heart of the work we do. People like you, who know what it's like to be on the front lines of education, who can speak to the real challenges teachers face every day." Emily felt a spark of excitement she hadn't felt since her early days of teaching. For so long, she'd been limited to the four walls of her classroom, but here was a chance to reach beyond those walls, to touch the lives of countless children and teachers she'd never even met. What would my role be?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of nerves and anticipation. Jonathan leaned forward, his gaze intent. "I want you to lead a new initiative we're launching, a program designed to support teachers in low-income areas, helping them provide for students who lack basic necessities. You'd be responsible for coordinating resources, working directly with schools, and ensuring that children receive the support they need to thrive. This initiative would allow teachers to offer assistance without fearing for their jobs." Emily could hardly believe what she was hearing. It was as if this role had been tailor-made for her, a chance to turn her own painful experience into a force for change. "That sounds incredible," she said softly, almost afraid to believe it was real. Jonathan smiled, sensing her hesitation. "I know it's a big leap, and I don't expect you to make a decision right away. Take some time to think about it. Talk to your family, weigh your options. But just know, Emily, that the work you would do here could change lives." Emily nodded, grateful for his patience. She knew this was an opportunity of a lifetime, but the fear of stepping into the unknown lingered. She'd spent so many years teaching that she'd never imagined herself doing anything else. The thought of leaving the familiar world of the classroom was daunting, even if it was for a cause she deeply believed in. As she left the building that day, her mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. Part of her yearned to accept Jonathan's offer, to step into this new role and make a difference on a larger scale. But another part of her feared losing the close, personal connection she had with her students, the day-to-day joys and challenges of teaching that had always brought her so much fulfillment. That night, Emily sat alone in her apartment, turning Jonathan's words over in her mind. She thought about Tommy and the look of gratitude in his eyes when she'd handed him those new shoes. She thought about her other students, the ones who struggled in silence, the ones she'd always tried to help in whatever small ways she could. This new role would allow her to help students just like them, to support teachers facing the same struggles she'd faced, and to bring resources to schools that desperately needed them. After hours of reflection, Emily finally came to a decision. She picked up her phone and dialed Jonathan's number, her heart pounding as she waited for him to pick up. "Emily," he answered, his voice warm and encouraging. "Yes, it's me," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves she felt. "I've thought about your offer, and I'd like to accept. I want to make a difference, and I believe this is how I can do it." There was a brief pause, and then Jonathan's voice filled with unmistakable excitement. "Emily, that's wonderful news. I'm thrilled to have you on board. Welcome to the Reeves Foundation. This is the beginning of something amazing, I promise." As she hung up, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed by a surge of excitement she hadn't felt in years. She was stepping into a new chapter of her life, one that promised to be filled with purpose, growth, and the chance to create real change. The next morning, Emily woke up with a renewed sense of energy. She dressed carefully, feeling a spark of joy as she imagined the work ahead. For the first time since she'd lost her job, she felt a true sense of direction. It was as if she'd been given a second chance, a way to turn her pain into something meaningful. As she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she felt a new sense of confidence. She was no longer just a teacher. She was now an advocate, a leader, and a voice for teachers and students who needed it most. And as she walked out the door, ready to begin her journey with the Reeves Foundation, she knew that this was just the beginning of an incredible new path. A new path unfolds. Emily's first day at the Reeves Foundation dawned bright and filled with anticipation. She felt a mix of excitement and apprehension, a sensation that reminded her of her first day as a teacher all those years ago. Standing before a new classroom, she'd felt ready to change the world, eager to pour herself into each lesson and every student. Now, as she walked into the sleek offices of the Reeves Foundation, she felt that same spark of purpose reignite, but with a sense of possibility that stretched far beyond the four walls of her old classroom. The office buzzed with energy as staff bustled about, making calls, working on projects, and engaging in discussions about new initiatives. Unlike the structured environment of a school, the Foundation's offices felt dynamic and fluid. People moved between desks, collaborated in meeting rooms, and shared ideas openly. Jonathan Reeves himself was often seen walking around, checking in on different departments, treating everyone with the warmth and respect that Emily had felt when she first met him. After being shown to her desk, Emily met her new team, a group of driven individuals, each passionate about making a difference in education. They included policy experts, social workers, financial advisors, and outreach coordinators, all working toward the same goal: to provide much-needed support for teachers and students in under-resourced schools. Her direct supervisor, Anna Tran, welcomed her with open arms, introducing her to the team and explaining the mission of the initiative Emily would be leading. "Welcome to the Education Equity Project," Anna said with a warm smile as she handed Emily a binder filled with project details. "We're here to address the resource gaps in low-income schools, particularly in areas that impact students' basic needs, like food, clothing, school supplies, and, of course, shoes. Anna gave a little nod toward Emily, her gaze acknowledging the reason Emily was here. Emily felt a surge of emotion as she took in the magnitude of the project. Her story with Tommy and the shoes had sparked the beginning of this initiative, and now she was going to be the one leading it. She thumbed through the binder, her heart swelling with pride as she looked at the pages that outlined the vision for the program. Each line, each objective, seemed to represent a part of her own journey and the struggles she had witnessed in her students. Anna continued, explaining the logistics of the project and the Foundation's partnerships with schools across the country. We want you to work directly with schools, visiting them, building relationships with teachers and administrators, and assessing their unique needs. This is a hands-on position, and we believe someone with your background will be invaluable in creating a program that's practical and impactful. Emily nodded, grateful for Anna's faith in her. The concept of visiting schools, seeing their challenges firsthand, and offering immediate support filled her with a sense of purpose. This was more than just a job. It was a chance to do the kind of work she'd dreamed of, to go beyond the limits that had held her back as a classroom teacher. Her first assignment came quickly. That very week, she would be visiting a school in a neighboring town to conduct an initial needs assessment. The school was part of a district that had long struggled with limited funding, and it was exactly the kind of place where the Education Equity Project was meant to make a difference. Emily spent the next few days preparing for her visit. She reviewed the data on the school's demographics, learning that over 70% of the students came from low-income households. Many of them relied on school-provided meals, and the majority of families had difficulty affording basic school supplies. The data felt familiar, reminding her of Meadow-Ridge and the countless faces of students who came to school hungry, distracted, or worried. When the day of her visit arrived, Emily dressed carefully, choosing the simple, approachable outfit that would make her feel at home in a school setting. As she drove to the school, she felt a twinge of nerves, unsure how the teachers and staff would receive her. She worried that they might see her as an outsider, someone removed from their daily struggles. After all, she was now with a foundation, a word that sometimes carried an air of formality and distance, but she reminded herself of her own roots, her own journey, and the compassion that had guided her here. The school building was older, with weathered bricks and a parking lot full of cracks. Inside, the floors showed the wear of years, and the walls were decorated with student art projects and motivational posters, their edges curling slightly with age. Emily noticed the signs of budget constraints immediately: scuffed floors, patched walls, and classrooms that lacked modern technology. But she also noticed the warmth of the staff, the smiles exchanged between teachers and students, the dedication evident in the faces of everyone she passed. The principal, a middle-aged woman named Ms. Hall, greeted her warmly. "We're thrilled to have you here, Emily," she said, leading her to a small conference room where a few teachers had gathered to discuss their needs with Emily. "The Education Equity Project could make a world of difference for us, and we're excited to share our story with you." Emily took a seat, listening carefully as the teachers spoke about the challenges they faced. One of them, Ms. Rodriguez, mentioned the high absentee rate among students who didn't have reliable transportation. Another teacher, Mr. Chung, spoke about the lack of supplies and how he often bought pencils and notebooks for his students out of his own pocket. They discussed their frustration at watching their students struggle, feeling limited in their ability to help. One story in particular stuck with Emily. Ms. Caldwell, a first-grade teacher with over 20 years of experience, described a young student who came to school in a torn coat every winter, his hands red from the cold because his family couldn't afford gloves. She recalled how the boy would shyly decline to go outside during recess, saying he preferred to stay in the classroom. "He's not the only one," Ms. Caldwell said, her voice trembling with quiet frustration. "We have so many children who come to school without what they need, and it breaks our hearts. We try to do what we can, but there's only so much we can provide on a teacher's salary." Emily felt the familiar pang of empathy and a renewed determination. She knew what it was like to want to give everything to her students, to see them flourish, only to be held back by systemic limitations. She took notes diligently, jotting down ideas on how the foundation could provide immediate relief while working toward long-term solutions. Over the next few weeks, Emily visited several more schools, each one presenting unique challenges but united by a common theme. Dedicated educators struggling to meet the needs of their students in an under-resourced system. She gathered stories, listened to concerns, and began sketching the framework for a pilot program that would distribute supplies and other necessities based on the specific needs of each school. One evening, as she reviewed her notes, she thought back to her first day as a teacher. She remembered how idealistic she'd felt, convinced that all her students needed was someone to believe in them. She hadn't understood then the immense role that resources, stability, and emotional support played in a child's education. Now, with years of experience behind her, she was determined to tackle the issue from a broader perspective. Emily worked tirelessly, often staying late at the office, refining the details of the program. She collaborated with social workers and community leaders, establishing partnerships with local businesses to help supply coats, shoes, and school supplies. The goal was to create a sustainable model that each school could eventually manage on its own, with the foundation serving as the initial support to help them get started. One afternoon, Jonathan stopped by her office, his face beaming with pride as he glanced over her latest proposal. "Emily, this is remarkable," he said, scanning the pages. "I knew you'd bring something special to this project, but you've gone above and beyond." Emily blushed, grateful for his encouragement. "Thank you, Jonathan. I just want to make sure we're really making a difference, not just providing temporary relief, but creating something that will last." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly the mindset we need here. I have no doubt that this program will change lives." By the time the pilot program was ready to launch, Emily felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She'd worked closely with the schools, forged new partnerships, and designed a model that would ensure each school had the resources to provide for its students' needs. And while she knew there would still be challenges ahead, she was filled with hope, knowing that the foundation had the potential to make a genuine impact. On the day the program officially launched, Emily stood in front of a crowd of teachers, parents, and community leaders, her heart swelling with pride as she spoke about the journey that had brought her here. She shared her story, from the small act of kindness that had cost her job to the incredible opportunity she'd found at the Reeves Foundation. As she looked out at the crowd, she saw not only faces of gratitude, but also faces of determination. These were people who believed in the cause, who understood the importance of supporting children and teachers alike. And in that moment, Emily realized that this was her calling. She was no longer just a teacher bound by the constraints of a classroom. She was an advocate, a force for change, and a voice for those who needed it most. Her journey had led her here, to a place where she could make a difference on a scale she'd never imagined. Emily smiled, feeling the weight of her purpose settle over her like a warm embrace. This was only the beginning, facing new challenges and expanding impact. Emily had always known that changing the educational landscape for underprivileged children wouldn't be easy, but as she dove deeper into her work at the Reeves Foundation, she found herself confronted with challenges that tested her resolve, her patience, and her belief in what was possible. The Education Equity Project's pilot program had launched successfully, and the initial feedback from the participating schools was overwhelmingly positive. Teachers and principals expressed gratitude for the resources and supplies, which had already made a noticeable difference in students' daily lives. But success, she quickly learned, came with its own set of obstacles. The first signs of resistance appeared in unexpected places. As the project expanded to more schools, Emily noticed some districts were hesitant to accept the foundation's help. Despite their evident need, administrators were wary of receiving external assistance, concerned that the involvement of an outside organization might disrupt the established routines or bring unwanted scrutiny. In one particular case, the superintendent of a large urban district refused the foundation's offer, citing a long-standing belief in self-sufficiency and a desire to avoid appearing as though they couldn't manage on their own. Emily knew that accepting outside help often came with a stigma, especially when dealing with schools that had historically been underfunded and overlooked. But to her, it was disheartening to see pride and politics stand in the way of children's welfare. Determined not to be deterred, Emily scheduled a meeting with the superintendent, hoping a face-to-face discussion would allow her to convey the foundation's mission and reassure him of their intentions. On a brisk Friday morning, she arrived at his office, armed with data, testimonials from other schools, and a resolve to make him understand the genuine impact the project could have on his district. As she took a seat across from the superintendent, she noticed his guarded expression, his posture rigid and formal. He listened politely as she explained the foundation's goals, his face unreadable. Emily described how the project didn't simply give away supplies, but also provided resources for sustainable support and training for teachers and staff to carry on the program independently over time. "I appreciate your passion, Ms. Lawson," the superintendent said finally, his tone carefully measured. "But our district has a history of standing on its own. We don't want to send a message to our community that we're relying on handouts. What kind of example would that set for our students?" Emily took a breath, carefully considering her response. "With all due respect, sir," she replied, her voice steady, "I believe the message we'd be sending is that we're committed to helping these students reach their full potential, that we're willing to break down barriers and do whatever it takes to support them. This isn't about pride. It's about giving children the tools they need to thrive." The superintendent's expression softened slightly, and she could see a glimmer of consideration in his eyes. But after a few moments, he shook his head. "I understand what you're saying, Ms. Lawson, but we have our own policies and protocols, and I can't approve this without a more thorough review. Perhaps another time." The words felt like a dismissal, but Emily held her ground. "I respect your decision, sir, and I hope that in the future you'll reconsider. Our doors are always open." The meeting ended without the outcome she'd hoped for, and as she left the office, Emily felt a pang of frustration. She wanted to believe that her passion alone could convince people of the importance of the project, but she was beginning to realize that navigating this new world required more than just good intentions. There were bureaucratic hurdles, unspoken alliances, and an undercurrent of resistance that she hadn't anticipated. Back at the foundation, Jonathan noticed the disappointment on her face and invited her to his office for a chat. As she sat down, she poured out her concerns, voicing her frustration at the roadblocks she was encountering. Jonathan listened intently, his eyes kind and understanding. "Emily," he said after a pause, "I know this isn't easy. Changing a system from the outside is one of the hardest things anyone can do. People are often resistant to change, even when they know it's for the better. But that's why your work here is so important. You're helping us lay the foundation for change, even if it doesn't always come as quickly as we'd like." Emily nodded, absorbing his words. "I just feel like I'm fighting an uphill battle," she admitted. "I thought people would be eager to support something that helps their students. I didn't expect so much resistance." Jonathan smiled, a hint of admiration in his gaze. "You're not alone in this, Emily. Change takes time and persistence. You're planting seeds, and even if you don't see them grow right away, they will. Don't lose heart." Encouraged by Jonathan's words, Emily threw herself back into her work with renewed determination. She spent the next few months refining the program, addressing concerns, and working closely with schools that had already implemented the project. She traveled across the state, meeting with principals, teachers, and even parents, building relationships and spreading the foundation's mission one conversation at a time. And slowly, word began to spread. One afternoon, she received a call from Ms. Hall, the principal of the first school she'd visited with the Education Equity Project. Ms. Hall's voice brimmed with excitement as she described the changes she'd seen since the program's implementation. "Emily, it's like night and day. Ms. Hall said, her voice filled with emotion. "Our students are more engaged, more confident. Teachers are seeing the difference, and parents have been so grateful. I don't know how to thank you." Hearing Ms. Hall's words lifted Emily's spirits. She knew there were still countless schools that needed help, and that systemic change wouldn't come overnight. But this was proof that her work was making a difference. She felt a renewed sense of purpose and began strategizing ways to further expand the program's reach. Around that time, the foundation received an invitation to participate in an educational summit focused on innovative solutions for underserved schools. Jonathan suggested that Emily present the Education Equity Project on behalf of the foundation, and though the prospect of speaking to a large audience made her nervous, she accepted. In the weeks leading up to the summit, Emily worked tirelessly on her presentation, crafting a narrative that highlighted the project's successes and the profound impact it had on students and teachers. She gathered testimonials, data, and stories, weaving them into a compelling case for expanding support to underfunded schools across the nation. When the day of the summit arrived, Emily took a deep breath as she stepped onto the stage. The room was filled with educators, administrators, philanthropists, and policymakers, all listening intently as she began her speech. She spoke passionately about her experiences, sharing the story of Tommy and the small act of kindness that had sparked her journey. She described the obstacles she'd faced, the resistance from certain districts, and the transformative power of even the smallest support for students in need. As she spoke, she felt her nerves dissipate, replaced by a steady resolve. She was not only sharing a vision but inviting her audience to be part of something larger than themselves. By the end of her presentation, the room erupted in applause. People approached her afterward, asking questions, expressing interest, and offering support. Representatives from other foundations, community organizations, and school districts reached out, eager to discuss potential collaborations. Emily felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't known since her days in the classroom. She was no longer just an advocate for her students. She was now a voice for children and teachers everywhere who struggled within a system that too often neglected them. In the following months, the Education Equity Project gained momentum. The foundation received new funding, allowing Emily to expand the program to additional schools and even pilot a mentorship initiative that connected experienced teachers with those in struggling districts. Emily found herself coordinating a network of educators, nonprofits, and local businesses, all working together to provide holistic support for students. One evening, as she sat at her desk surrounded by reports, proposals, and letters from teachers thanking her for the program, Emily reflected on her journey. She thought about the day she bought Tommy those shoes, an act that had led her down a path she never could have imagined. She realized that her dismissal from Meadow Ridge Elementary, painful as it had been, had given her a purpose beyond the classroom. She was no longer bound by the limitations of a single school. She was free to create lasting change for children across the country. Despite the long hours, the bureaucratic obstacles, and the setbacks, Emily felt fulfilled in a way she hadn't before. She was part of something bigger than herself, a movement dedicated to ensuring that every child, no matter their background, had the chance to succeed. And as she looked out the window at the city lights, she felt a deep sense of peace, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. With each new school she visited, each student she met, Emily carried the hope that her work would plant the seeds of change, creating a future where kindness, compassion, and opportunity were not rare acts, but guiding principles. Emily's Heart Fund and the Legacy of Kindness. Emily never would have guessed that her simple act of kindness, buying a pair of shoes for a young student, would lead her to where she was now. It was surreal to look back at that day, which felt like a lifetime ago, and see how her life had transformed in ways she hadn't imagined. She'd gone from a classroom teacher to an advocate, a leader, and an agent for change. And now, after months of tireless work, countless obstacles, and personal growth, she was preparing to launch a program in her own name, Emily's Heart Fund. The idea had come about during a lunch meeting with Jonathan, who was keen on finding ways to expand the Foundation's mission of providing comprehensive support for students and teachers. He'd always valued Emily's insights, and as they discussed future initiatives, Jonathan surprised her with a proposal. "I think it's time we honor the person who inspired all of this," he said, setting his coffee cup down with a serious expression. Emily looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Jonathan smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "I want to start a new program within the Foundation, a fund dedicated to supporting students in need, providing them not only with essentials like shoes, clothes, and school supplies, but also scholarships and mentorship programs. We'll call it Emily's Heart Fund, in honor of your dedication and compassion." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Emily felt a surge of disbelief. "Jonathan, I don't know what to say," she stammered, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You've earned this, Emily," he said warmly. "The work you've done here, the impact you've had on countless children and teachers, it deserves to be recognized. And by naming this fund after you, we'll carry on your legacy of kindness, inspiring others to step forward and make a difference." Emily was overwhelmed with emotion. She'd never sought recognition or accolades. Her joy had always come from the quiet satisfaction of helping others, from the small victories she witnessed in the lives of her students. But to have a program in her name, one that would continue to help children long after she was gone, this was more than she could have ever dreamed of. The next few months were a whirlwind as the Foundation worked to launch Emily's Heart Fund. Emily was deeply involved in every step of the process, from defining the fund's goals and eligibility criteria to partnering with local businesses and philanthropists who were eager to contribute. She wanted the fund to be more than just a source of material support. She wanted it to be a bridge for students, connecting them to mentors, opportunities, and resources that would empower them to reach their full potential. Finally, the day of the launch arrived. Emily stood on stage at a large community event, looking out at the crowd that had gathered to celebrate the launch of Emily's Heart Fund. The auditorium was filled with teachers, students, parents, donors, and community leaders, all eager to show their support for the cause. As she prepared to speak, Emily felt a rush of nerves, but she was determined to share her journey and her vision with the people who had supported her along the way. She took a deep breath, then began. "Thank you all for being here today," she said, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. "This fund isn't just about giving children shoes or school supplies. It's about giving them hope, about showing them that there are people in this world who believe in them, who want to see them succeed." She looked out at the crowd, her eyes falling on familiar faces, Jonathan, Anna, and even Mrs. Caldwell, one of the parents who had supported her from the beginning. "When I was a teacher, I saw firsthand how much difference a little kindness could make. I saw children light up when they received even the smallest gesture of support, and I realized that sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness to change the trajectory of a child's life." Emily paused, her voice catching as she continued. "This fund is for every child who has ever felt like they didn't have enough, for every teacher who's had to reach into their own pockets to help a student. It's for the children who deserve the same opportunities as everyone else, regardless of where they come from. This is for them." The audience erupted in applause, and Emily felt a swell of gratitude wash over her. After her speech, she spent the rest of the evening meeting donors, parents, and teachers who approached her with words of encouragement, stories of their own struggles, and heartfelt gratitude for the work she was doing. She was humbled by the outpouring of support, and she felt a deep sense of responsibility to carry forward the mission she had helped create. As the months passed, Emily's Heart Fund grew rapidly. Schools across the state applied for grants, and teachers wrote letters detailing the impact the fund was having on their students. Emily received countless stories. Children who could finally participate in sports because they had proper shoes, students who felt a renewed sense of confidence thanks to new clothes, and young minds who were able to dream a little bigger because they'd been given a chance. One story, in particular, moved Emily deeply. A fifth-grade teacher from a rural school shared the story of a young girl named Aliyah who had always loved learning but struggled with low self-esteem. Aliyah came from a family facing severe financial hardships, and she often felt out of place among her classmates. But through Emily's Heart Fund, the school was able to provide Aliyah with school supplies, new clothes, and even a small scholarship to attend a summer science camp. Aliyah came back from camp with a spark I hadn't seen before, the teacher wrote in her letter. She spoke about her experiences with pride, and for the first time, I saw her dream big. She told me she wanted to be a scientist and make discoveries that could help others. And it's all because someone believed in her enough to give her this opportunity. Emily read the letter through tears, feeling an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. This was the impact she had dreamed of making, helping children see beyond their current circumstances, inspiring them to reach for their dreams. Aliyah's story was just one of many, and each one fueled Emily's commitment to continue growing the fund, to reach even more children who needed someone to believe in them. Over time, Emily's Heart Fund expanded to other states, and soon it became a nationwide initiative. Jonathan and the foundation supported her every step of the way, providing the resources and partnerships needed to scale the program. Emily traveled across the country, visiting schools, meeting with educators, and listening to the stories of the children she was helping. Each encounter deepened her resolve, and each success story reaffirmed her belief in the power of kindness. Years later, Emily stood at the opening, and as she stepped away from the podium, surrounded by the warmth of the community she had helped to build, Emily knew that her journey was far from over. She would continue to advocate, to inspire, and to uplift. For her, kindness was more than an act. It was a lifelong mission.